Hey everybody, I wanted you to meet somebody. This is Bear. You might hear him in the background occasionally because I'm recording here, and he's a good boy, but he's goofus. So he's got to save us from all of the 7-year-olds riding their bicycles out in the street, and God forbid a delivery man come and try to murder us. So he got to save us from that. I just want to introduce you in case he made any comments in the background. So I'm going to put him down. But he's a good boy. Well, the video on neurotransmission was a little bit technical. I understand that. I hope that you got it. I'm going to summarize it for you, and so take good notes on this. Write it all down. I'll say it multiple times. I'm not just going to say it once. So be sure to take really good notes on this because it's extremely important, and we'll talk more about why it's important at the end of the summary of it and the understanding of it. Now, you know the anatomy of the neuron. Now you've heard the overview and the information about neurotransmission and how that works. But neurotransmission is an electrochemical process. You start taking notes now. It's an electrochemical process with each chemical and chemical compound having a unique electrical signal. That's the chemical creating an electrical charge. It's much like the battery in a car. Y'all probably don't even know this, a lot of you. But your battery has acid in it and some plates made out of various materials that cause a chemical reaction that generates electricity. And so that's exactly what neurotransmission is. It's a chemical reaction that generates electricity. So neurotransmitters, and you know a whole bunch of those already. You probably don't know that you do, but there's a big group called dopamine. You've heard of dopamine, and that's a big group of neurotransmitters. There's way more than one. Endorphins is a big group of neurotransmitters, and there's all these big groups of neurotransmitters, and they're just chemicals and chemical compounds that create electrical signals that help or create communication between nerve cells to tell our bodies what to do and our brain to how to process the information coming in and how to create information to go out. And you've got a basic understanding of the neuroanatomy, and so now let's summarize how neurotransmission works. All right, the information is received in the dendritic bulb at a receptor site. At the receptor site, an electrical signal is created by the chemical neurotransmitter. Its electrical signal is transmitted down the dendrite to the cell body and the nucleus of the cell. If the cell assesses it as significantly strong, it continues the electrical signal down the axon to the dendrites and the dendritic bulbs at the other end of the signal. So an electrical signal travels along the neuron along the axon to the dendritic bulbs at one end. At the dendritic bulbs, neurotransmitter, the little chemical transmitter, is stored in an organelle called vesicles, vesicles, vesicle. When the electrical charge travels along the axon to the dendritic bulb, vesicles are stimulated. They move to the cell membrane, rupture, and empty the neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft. So here comes the electrical charge to the dendritic bulb. The vesicles with the neurotransmitter move to the cell membrane, rupture, and empty their neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft, which is the space between the neurons. The dendrites from adjacent neurons don't ever actually touch. There's always these little spaces in between. They don't actually touch. So in the synaptic cleft, the neurotransmitter. One of 4 things happens to the neurotransmitter in that synaptic cleft. It's either received by the adjacent neurons at the receptor sites, which causes an electrical signal to travel along their axon and continue the message, or there's an enzyme in the synaptic cleft called monoamine oxidase, MONAMINE OXIDASE, monoamine oxidase. Anytime it's got ASE at the end of a chemical compound or a word, that means it's an enzyme. So the first thing is that a neurotransmitter can be received at the adjacent neurons' receptor sites, stimulating the adjacent neurons. The second thing that can happen is monoamine oxidase in the synaptic cleft, which is an enzyme, can eat that stuff. Monoamine oxidase's job is just an enzyme. It's not, but I think of it as Pac-Man eating neurotransmitter. Why would it do that? Why do you need something to get rid of excess neurotransmitter? Well, what would happen if neurotransmitter just hung out in the synaptic cleft all the time? The adjacent neurons would be constantly stimulated. The nervous system would become fatigued, right? How do you feel when you're depressed? What do you think one of the theories about depression is? Exactly, that there's too much neurotransmitter left in the synaptic cleft. The system is inappropriately activated constantly, and the system becomes fatigued. That's one of the theories about how depression works. So that's the second thing that can happen to neurotransmitter. The first one is received. The second one is it's destroyed by monoamine oxidase in the synaptic cleft. The third one is it can diffuse out into the surrounding plasma. And that's just a process called diffusion. It diffuses out into the surrounding process. But the fourth one, he talked about a little bit in the videotape, although he did it with some kind of technical language, is the process called reuptake, R-E-U-P-T-A-K-E, reuptake, where the cell recycles, the original cell that released the neurotransmitter, recycles a portion of that neurotransmitter through the process of reuptake. And he explained it just a little bit, got a little technical, but it recycles it through organelles in the cell body, blah, 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 blah. And you don't need to know that. You just need to know these four functions. Here's what happens to neurotransmitter. It's received, it's destroyed by monoamine oxidase, it's diffused into surrounding plasma, or it's recycled through a process called reuptake. Now, another theory of depression is that there's not enough neurotransmitter left in the synaptic cleft because of the process of reuptake not working efficiently and taking back too much. So you treat that depression with a group of drugs called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what do you think that drug does? That group of drugs, big group of drugs, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, bunch of them, about a dozen SSRIs. Exactly. It inhibits the reuptake of certain serotonins. And what it does is just slow down. Inhibit means to slow down, or it doesn't mean prohibit. Inhibit just means to slow down or cause a disruption in, so that it's not reuptaking so much neurotransmitter and recycling it. It allows more to stay in the synaptic cleft for reception at adjacent cells. And that's a too little theory. So there's essentially two theories of depression and neurotransmitter. One is that there's too much left in the synaptic cleft, and so the system is activated all the time. And the other one is that there is too little, and it wants to leave. The medications seek to leave more neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft so the neurons can function appropriately. Either way, after the reuptake, the next step in the neurotransmission is that the original cell synthesizes any additional neurotransmitter that it needs for the process and to be able to activate next time, and returns to a resting state. So here are the steps, in summary, of neurotransmission. A cell is stimulated, causing an electrical signal to travel the length of the axon to the dendritic bulbs. In the dendritic bulbs, neurotransmitters stored in vesicles. The vesicles move to the cell membrane, rupture, empty the neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft. In the synaptic cleft, the neurotransmitter is received at the adjacent neurons, destroyed by MAO, monoamine oxidase, recycled through a process called reuptake, or diffused into the surrounding plasma. The fourth step, the next step is the adjacent neurons are activated and continue transmission of the message. Then the original cell synthesizes enough neurotransmitter to refill the vesicles and returns to a resting state. That's it for neurotransmission. Watch it 2 or 3 times. Make sure you get all that down, all of those steps.